which controls the brain, which controls the whole system, through to this not only very male-dominated patriarchal system is issuing the money, but also from money that was so tied to the productive capacity of the planet to money that is so abstract that, and just really think about this for a moment, in our economic system, what are we looking for? Well, the thing that we're all trying to do is keep GNP growing. If you look at, standard economic textbooks and government policy, to try to keep GNP growing in a reasonable fashion. Well, what is GNP growth? You cut down a forest, you sell the timber, well, that's grown GNP. Of course, you don't have forest anymore, but it doesn't, it doesn't really matter. We'll get there in a minute. Because, of course, it does matter. But even more, and again, Charles alluded to this, the monetary system has, I'll actually speak for a moment about usury. The principle, there's nothing wrong with the idea of debt. Gift economies are based on debts. They're just rather more amorphous obligations. But even mutual credit systems, when you create a credit, you create a debt. Our systems are kind of tiny, which we'll talk about some more in a bit, what we're creating in New York. Debt's not the issue. Even getting a return for lending somebody money is not an issue in as much as the return is factored in for the risk. Where there's risk you're going to lose money, getting some return back is not a problem. The issue comes in interest. This idea that just capital on its own has a right to somehow accumulate and grow in value. And if I lend it to you, you owe me back more than I lent you. This is problematic for a huge variety of reasons. Interestingly enough, and has been banned by Christianity up until the time when the Protestants unbanned it in about the 17th century, around the time that they then basically ended up having a huge mercantile empire, at which point the Catholics kind of sort of unbanned it to try to compete. The Muslims never unbanned it, and look where they are compared to where they were when the Protestants unbanned it. Usury is a very, very, very powerful tool for growth, and both growth of empire, because what you do when you have a system, for those who don't know it, every single dollar that you have ever held, that you have ever owned, has been created as a result of the creation of an equal and opposite debt. It's kind of a hard thing to really get your head around, so I'm not going to go into it, I'll just take it on trust for now. What this means is... Trust, exactly. What this means is that every dollar that comes into existence requires not just a dollar of debt, but that debt is growing with interest, which requires more money to be brought into existence to meet it, which means that there's this sort of cancerous engine of growth, again, a very yang phenomenon that's built into the money system. This then has caused the money system to grow and eat all of these relationships of social capital, to go and eat natural capital like fisheries and forests, to eat indigenous cultures, and to eat basically everything that wasn't within the purview of the monetary system until it had nothing to do apart from create subprime mortgage CDOs. This is what happens when you don't have any more social and natural capital to take. You need financial engineering innovation to try to just keep the bubble growing. And it has reached an unsustainable stage, as we've seen recently in the explosion of that bubble. Because fundamentally, we have a system that says, if I destroy a virgin rainforest that has a certain value put on it, how we even do that is a somewhat absurd thing, but that's another question. I destroy that virgin rainforest, but I create an equivalent amount of subprime mortgage debt. GNP's gone up, so we're all good. This brings me to a really fundamental point, which is that one of the great successes of money, which is also one of its great failures and disasters, is that money allows all forms of value to be fungible. This means that we have a single monetary system and we put a dollar price on everything. Now, realistically, how much is an hour worth? Well, an hour of your life is probably worth more if you just found out you have 3 days to live. But we put a price on an hour, and frankly, the pricing system for your hour is not going to change just because you only have 3 days to live. The economy is still seeing your hours worth that much. What's the price on love? What's the price on relationships? What's the price of natural resources? You know, all of these are fundamentally non-fungible forms of value in our psyche, but we created this story and this value system based on this separateness that we can be atomic units, value each of these things separately, and we end up with this massive, growing monoculture of money. Why is this a problem? Well, one, because it makes people miserable. Two, because we have a limited amount of natural capital on the planet, and fundamentally our economics was mostly developed in the 19th and early 20th centuries, when the size of our economy compared to the size of the natural resource pool was pretty small. But you only have to grow GDP at 5 or 10%, 2 or 3%, you know, for a decade or two, and you know, a few decades, and the economy doubles. And it doubles again. It doubles again. So we now use about 1.3 Earths worth of renewable productive capacity every year. We've kind of, you know, it's like we live on the interest on the Earth from January to September, and we're eating into principal from September through December, and our spending is going up, and the nest egg's going down as we're eating into the principal. This is a problem. Next problem. So, the fundamental principle of usury, I like to look at it as enslavement, enslaving capital. You have this principle that if I have capital and I'm going to put it to work for anything, it needs to give me back a return that is at least equivalent to the interest rate. This principle of slavery of money, and it really does carry water, this carries through into our relationships and our working lives and our economic relationships. There is this kind of enslavement and power over, and also obviously this scarcity phenomenon. This ridiculous thing, again, Taoists, where you get a maximum of one thing, it starts to create its opposite. So we have this currency that's based on scarcity. So what do we have? We have massive overconsumption. We consume far more than we need to, because we're all trying to avoid the scarcity, which is an artifact in the first place. So, enough about the problems. The question is, and what we're all here to start talking about tonight, is how do we fix them? I want to talk for a moment about monoculture. There's an interesting phenomenon when you look at complex systems or living systems, that the more efficient a system gets, this economist Bernard Lietaer, who many of us know about, who's kind of guru in this stuff, talks about a complex system, the more efficient it gets, the less resilient it is. So look at it this way. If you have 100 organic farms next to each other on 1,000 acres of land, as against one giant farm that's just producing corn, well, the giant farm that's just producing corn is probably going to be able to make a higher return on invested capital because of the economies of scale, etc., at least until it completely destroys the productive capacity of the land. But the organic farms are far, far more resilient, because a single pest can come in and wipe out the whole, industrial farms. You need the antibiotics, etc., etc. This applies across the board, and our fundamental rules of economics are about the idea of creating maximum efficiency. Once you get into the equations in any economics textbook, this maximum efficiency is what drives us to a situation where if I can, for 10 cents cheaper, have some slave laborer in China in a factory produce something, have people in the Middle East